The avoidant is sitting in the wreckage of their life, and every piece of destruction traces back to how they treated you. This isn't poetic justice or wishful thinking. This is the actual consequence of their patterns finally catching up to them in ways they can no longer deny or rationalize away. The mistreatment of you wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of deep dysfunction that affects every area of their life. And while you were in the relationship, while you were the one absorbing the impact of their avoidance, the dysfunction was contained mostly to the relationship itself. But after you left, after you stopped accepting their mistreatment, the dysfunction that was focused on you spread to everything else. Their career is suffering because the same fear of vulnerability that destroyed your relationship makes them unable to form professional connections necessary for advancement. Their other relationships are falling apart because the patterns they used with you are the patterns they use with everyone. Their mental health is deteriorating because they're no longer able to avoid the feelings that mistreating you allowed them to suppress. Their entire life is imploding, and the implosion started with losing you and has radiated outward until nothing is stable, nothing is working, nothing is okay. The avoidant destroyed their own life by mistreating you, and the destruction is comprehensive and seemingly irreversible. What makes the destruction particularly devastating is that it's self-inflicted. No external force destroyed the avoidant's life. You didn't destroy it through revenge or retaliation. Life circumstances didn't destroy it through bad luck. The avoidant destroyed their own life through their choices, their patterns, their inability to show up for someone who mattered. And this self-inflicted quality makes the destruction impossible to escape. The avoidant can't blame anyone else. They can't point to external factors. They have to sit with the knowledge that they had something good with you, they mistreated you until you left, and the leaving triggered a cascade of consequences that have destroyed everything they thought was solid in their life. The destruction is their fault, and knowing it's their fault is part of what makes the destruction so complete. They can't protect themselves from the pain through externalization or blame. They have to face that they're the author of their own devastation. The avoidance life being destroyed for mistreating you is also revealing something that was always true, but that they successfully denied while you were absorbing their dysfunction. They were never as put together as they appeared. The career that seemed stable was actually fragile, maintained only through surface competence, while avoiding the deeper connections that create real professional success. The friendships that seemed solid were actually shallow, sustained through avoidance of real intimacy rather than through genuine bonding. The mental health that seemed fine was actually barely managed, held together by defenses that worked only as long as nothing challenged them too severely. You leaving, you refusing to accept their mistreatment anymore, challenged everything, and once challenged, the facade crumbled. The avoidance life is being destroyed because it was always a house of cards, and losing you was the wind that finally knocked it down. The professional destruction that follows personal dysfunction. The avoidance career is collapsing in ways that connect directly to the patterns that destroyed your relationship. The same inability to be vulnerable that made them unavailable to you makes them unable to form the professional relationships that advancement requires. They can't network effectively because networking requires openness and trust. They can't collaborate successfully because collaboration requires emotional availability they don't have. They can't lead teams because leadership requires the ability to connect with people authentically. All the professional skills they lack are the same relational skills they lacked with you, and the lack that seemed like just relationship problem is now revealed as comprehensive limitation that affects every domain of their life. The avoidant is also being professionally destroyed because the emotional distress from losing you is affecting their functioning. They can't focus because they're obsessing about you. They can't perform at their previous level because they're depressed about the relationship ending. They can't engage fully with their work because all their energy is going toward managing the feelings that losing you activated. The avoidant thought they could compartmentalize, could keep their relationship dysfunction from affecting other areas of life. But feelings don't compartmentalize. The grief and regret and shame about how they treated you is bleeding into everything, making them less competent, less reliable, less functional than they need to be to maintain their career trajectory. The professional destruction also includes the avoidant burning bridges through the same patterns they used with you. They're being inconsistent with colleagues. They're withdrawing from projects when collaboration gets too close. They're being cold and dismissive with people who try to support them. They're repeating with coworkers the exact patterns they used with you, pushing away people who care, being unavailable when they're needed, mistreating people who don't deserve mistreatment, and in professional contexts, these patterns have immediate consequences. Colleagues stop wanting to work with them. Managers stop trusting them with important projects. Opportunities go to other people who are more reliable and more relationally functional. The avoidant is learning that the patterns that destroy relationships also destroy careers, and the lesson is coming at enormous professional cost. The career destruction is particularly acute because the avoidant relied on professional success to validate their worth. When the relationship with you ended, when they lost that source of validation, they tried to get validation from career achievements. But the same issues that destroyed the relationship are now destroying the career, which means they're losing both major sources of identity and worth simultaneously. The avoidant is facing professional failure at the same time they're facing relational failure, and the combination is creating identity crisis so severe that they can barely function. They don't know who they are if they're not successful professionally and not strong relationally. And discovering they're failing at both is destruction of self-concept. That's making everything else fall apart faster. The relational destruction that extends beyond you. The avoidant isn't just losing you, they're losing everyone. The patterns that destroyed your relationship are destroying every other relationship in their life. Friends are pulling away because the avoidant is too withdrawn, too unavailable, too unable to show up when they're needed. Family members are frustrated because the avoidant won't let them in, won't accept support, won't be vulnerable enough to maintain real connection. New romantic interests aren't lasting because the avoidant is repeating the exact same cycle they went through with you. Initial intensity followed by withdrawal followed by eventual abandonment. The avoidant is experiencing comprehensive relational destruction, losing person after person, watching their social world shrink to nothing because they can't stop doing the things that drive people away. The destruction of friendships is happening because friends are tired of the avoidant's emotional unavailability. Friends want reciprocity. They want mutual support. They want someone who shows up when they're going through hard times. But the avoidant can't show up. They can't be there emotionally for anyone because being there requires vulnerability they don't have access to. So friends are drifting away, not dramatically but gradually, just becoming less available, less interested in maintaining connection with someone who gives nothing back. The avoidant is becoming isolated not through active rejection, but through passive abandonment by people who are tired of the one-sided dynamic where they give and the avoidant takes or just absence themselves entirely. The avoidant's family relationships are also deteriorating because family members see the patterns clearly and they're running out of patience. Family has tolerated the avoidant's emotional distance for years, made excuses for their difficulty with intimacy, given them space to be who they are. But watching the avoidant lose you, watching them destroy a relationship with someone family members could see was good for them, has exhausted family tolerance. Family is confronting the avoidant about their patterns. They're saying things like, "You always do this. You're going to end up alone. You need to get help." And the avoidant is responding to confrontation the only way they know how, by creating more distance. They're pulling away from family rather than hearing family's concern, and the pulling away is destroying these relationships too. New romantic attempts are failing immediately because the avoidant is damaged goods who hasn't healed anything. They're trying to date new people while carrying all the pain and dysfunction from losing you. They're more defended than ever, more afraid of vulnerability, more convinced relationships are dangerous. So new connections never get off the ground. The avoidant withdraws at the first sign of real feeling. They sabotage anything that starts to feel good. They're repeating the cycle with each new person but faster, destroying in weeks what used to take months. And each failed connection is more evidence to the avoidant that they're fundamentally incapable of relationship, which makes them more hopeless, which makes them more defended, which makes the next attempt even more likely to fail. The destruction is self-reinforcing, each loss making the next loss more inevitable. The mental health destruction that can't be avoided anymore. The avoidant's mental health is collapsing because they can no longer avoid the feelings that mistreating you allowed them to suppress. While you were in the relationship, while you were absorbing their dysfunction, the avoidant could avoid their own pain. They could focus on managing you rather than facing themselves. They could stay in their patterns without confronting what the patterns were protecting them from. But after you left, after you stopped being the repository for their dysfunction, they had nowhere to put it except inside themselves. And they're not equipped to handle it. The depression, anxiety, and shame they've been avoiding their entire life is crushing them now. And they have no coping mechanisms except avoidance, which no longer works because there's nothing left to avoid into. The depression is severe because it's about comprehensive loss combined with total self-blame. The avoidant has lost you, lost their professional trajectory, lost their friendships, lost their sense of self. And they know it's their fault. They know they created all of this through their mistreatment of you and their inability to change their patterns. This combination of devastating loss plus complete responsibility is creating depression so deep they can barely function. They're struggling to get out of bed. They're not eating properly. They're not engaging with life. They're just existing in fog of hopelessness about themselves and their future, unable to see a way forward, because moving forward would require being different, and they don't know how to be different. The anxiety is equally severe because the avoidant is experiencing what they've spent their life defending against: vulnerability without control. They're vulnerable to their feelings now. They're vulnerable to others' judgment of them. They're vulnerable to future loss because they've lost so much already. And the vulnerability is constant, inescapable, overwhelming. The anxiety manifests as hypervigilance about more loss, panic about their life situation, obsessive rumination about you and what they destroyed. The avoidant can't calm their nervous system because their nervous system is accurately perceiving threat. The threat that they're going to continue losing things and people because they're incapable of doing what's required to keep anything good. The shame is perhaps most destructive because it's about core identity. The avoidant isn't just ashamed of specific actions. They're ashamed of who they are fundamentally. They're ashamed that they mistreated you when you didn't deserve mistreatment. They're ashamed that they're watching their life fall apart and can't stop it. They're ashamed that they're living exactly the life they always feared: alone, unsuccessful, unable to connect with anyone. The shame is so comprehensive it's become their identity. They're not a person who made mistakes, they're a mistake. They're not someone who has problems, they are the problem. And this level of shame makes any kind of recovery or growth nearly impossible because shame convinces you you're not worth recovering or growing. The financial destruction that follows the other losses. The avoidance finances are being destroyed as consequence of all the other destruction. They're not performing well at work, which affects their income or results in job loss. They're spending money attempting to numb the pain through substances, shopping, or other addictive behaviors. They're incurring costs from mental health crisis, including potential therapy, medication, or hospitalization they can finally no longer avoid. The financial destruction is adding to their stress, which is affecting their mental health, which is affecting their ability to earn money, which is making their financial situation worse. It's a vicious cycle where each area of destruction feeds the others. The financial consequences are also forcing the avoidant to face practical realities they could avoid while life was stable. They might have to move to cheaper housing. They might have to give up lifestyle elements they took for granted. They might have to ask for help, which requires the vulnerability they've spent their life avoiding. The financial pressure is forcing the avoidant into corners where they can't maintain their defended independence, where they have to admit they need others, where their self-sufficiency fantasy is revealed as exactly that, fantasy. And facing this is another layer of destruction because it's destroying their identity as independent person who doesn't need anyone. The financial destruction is also preventing the avoidant from accessing resources that might help them recover. Therapy is expensive, taking time off work to heal is expensive. Making life changes that might improve their situation requires financial buffer they no longer have. So they're trapped in the destruction, unable to afford the interventions that might halt the downward spiral, forced to watch their life continue deteriorating because they don't have resources to stop it. The destruction feeds itself, each loss making recovery harder, each hardship making the next loss more likely. The realization that comes too late. In the midst of all this destruction, the avoidant is finally realizing what you meant to them. They're recognizing that you were the stabilizing force in their life, the person who absorbed their dysfunction and somehow still provided support and care. They're understanding that losing you removed the linchpin holding everything together, and without you, everything has collapsed. They're seeing clearly that you weren't the problem. You were the solution they rejected, because accepting you would have required the vulnerability that their destruction now forces on them anyway. This realization is devastating because it comes too late. You're gone. You've moved on. You're not available to be what they now understand they needed. The realization without possibility of restoration is its own form of destruction. The avoidant is also realizing that they did to themselves exactly what they feared others would do to them. They were terrified of being abandoned, being hurt, being rejected. So they abandoned you first. They hurt you before you could hurt them. They rejected intimacy before intimacy could reject them. But in protecting themselves from feared pain, they created actual pain far worse than anything they were defending against. They destroyed their own life through their defenses. And realizing this, that their protection mechanisms were actually self-destruction mechanisms, is forcing the avoidant to question everything they've believed about safety, relationships, and what it means to protect yourself. The realization that the destruction could have been prevented is particularly torturous. If the avoidant had just been able to show up for you, if they'd done therapy when you suggested it, if they'd been willing to be vulnerable when you created safety for it, if they'd treated you the way you deserve to be treated, if they'd chosen connection over defense, any of these choices, made differently, could have prevented everything that's happening now. But they didn't make different choices. They chose their patterns over the relationship. And now they're living with consequences of choices they can't undo, watching destruction that could have been prevented if only they'd been different than they were capable of being at the time. The question of whether they'll learn or just harden. The destruction of the avoidant's life for mistreating you creates a fork in the road. One path leads to the avoidant finally hitting rock bottom hard enough that they seek real help. They get into intensive therapy. They commit to healing their attachment wounds. They do the deep, painful work of examining their patterns and developing capacity they currently lack. They use the destruction as catalyst for transformation, recognizing that continuing their current patterns will result in more of the same, and they can't survive more of the same. This path is possible but rare. Most avoidants don't take it because taking it requires admitting they need help, accepting their patterns as problems, tolerating the vulnerability of therapeutic work. Most can't or won't do these things even after comprehensive life destruction. The more common path is hardening. The avoidant responds to the destruction by building higher walls, becoming more defended, more convinced that relationships are dangerous and people can't be trusted. They tell themselves they're better off alone. They decide that the pain of isolation is preferable to the pain of vulnerability. They construct narratives that protect their ego. You weren't right for them anyway. Relationships aren't worth the effort. They're too damaged for partnership. These narratives allow them to avoid facing that they created their own destruction and could choose differently in the future. The hardening is the avoidant protecting themselves from the lessons the destruction is trying to teach them, and the protection guarantees they'll repeat their patterns in future relationships if they ever attempt relationships again. Some avoidants will oscillate between these paths, moving toward help when pain is acute, then hardening again when acute pain subsides into chronic misery. They might start therapy and quit. They might have moments of genuine insight that don't translate into behavioral change. They might recognize their patterns without being willing to do what's required to transform them. This oscillation is its own kind of destruction because it's the avoidant continuously getting close to change but never fully committing to it, which means they're never fully hardened but also never fully healing. They exist in perpetual state of partial awareness of their problems combined with full maintenance of the patterns that cause the problems. What the destruction teaches about consequences. The avoidant's life being destroyed for mistreating you is vivid illustration of a truth they spent their life denying. Actions have consequences. For years, perhaps decades, the avoidant avoided consequences through other people's accommodation of their patterns. When they withdrew, people pursued them. When they were cold, people stayed warm toward them. When they mistreated, people made excuses for them. But you finally imposed consequences by leaving and staying gone. and that imposition of consequences triggered cascade that has destroyed their life. The destruction is what happens when someone who's never faced real consequences finally faces them all at once. The destruction is teaching that you can't build a life on avoidance. The avoidant tried to build life by avoiding vulnerability, avoiding intimacy, avoiding need, and for a while it seemed to work. They maintained career, maintained some relationships, maintained functioning, but the building was unstable because it was built on avoidance rather than on actual foundation. And when you left, when the primary relationship organizing their life ended, the instability was revealed. The whole structure came down because it was never solid. It just looked solid as long as nothing stressed it too severely. The destruction is teaching that apparent stability maintained through avoidance isn't real stability. It's delayed destruction waiting for catalyst. The avoidant is also learning that you can't avoid pain long term. You can only choose which pain you experience. The avoidant chose to avoid the pain of vulnerability and intimacy. But that choice didn't eliminate pain. It just traded one pain for another. They avoided vulnerability pain by accepting isolation pain. They avoided intimacy pain by accepting shallow relationship pain. They avoided need pain by accepting the pain of losing people who won't tolerate being unneeded. And now they're discovering that the pain they accepted to avoid vulnerability and intimacy is actually worse than the pain they were avoiding. The destruction is teaching that strategic pain avoidance doesn't work, because all paths include pain, and the path of avoidance often leads to worse pain than the path of facing what scares you, whether you should feel guilty about their destruction. You might know the avoidance life is being destroyed and feel guilt about your role in it. You left them, you withdrew your energy, you stopped accepting their mistreatment, and these actions triggered the destruction. But your guilt, while understandable, is misplaced. You didn't destroy their life. They destroyed their life through mistreating you and through maintaining patterns that make healthy relationships impossible. You simply stopped preventing the natural consequences of their dysfunction from manifesting. You stopped being the barrier between them and the results of their actions. The destruction was always the logical endpoint of their patterns. You just stopped delaying it. You also shouldn't feel guilty because protecting yourself is not the same as hurting someone else. You had every right to leave when someone was mistreating you. You had every right to refuse to accept treatment that was damaging you. You had every right to prioritize your well-being over maintaining a relationship with someone who couldn't meet your needs. Your self-protection was healthy and necessary. The fact that your self-protection triggered destruction in their life is information about how dependent they were on your acceptance of their dysfunction, not information that you did something wrong by refusing to continue accepting it. The destruction the avoidant is experiencing is also potentially the best thing that could happen to them long term. Sometimes people need their life to fall apart completely before they're willing to do the work to build it back differently. The destruction might be the wake-up call the avoidant needs. It might be the bottom that finally motivates change. It might be the crisis that forces them into therapy they've been avoiding for decades. You didn't destroy them to hurt them. But if the destruction you triggered through leaving eventually leads to their healing, you'll have done them the greatest service anyone could have, even though it won't feel like service and they'll likely never thank you for it. The permanent cost of mistreating someone who deserved better. The ultimate lesson in the avoidance life being destroyed is that mistreating someone who deserved better carries permanent cost. Even if the avoidant does the work, even if they heal, even if they develop capacity they currently lack, they can't undo the destruction. They can't get back the years lost. They can't restore the relationships they destroyed. They can't recover the professional momentum they lost. They can't have you back because you've moved on to a life that doesn't include them. The destruction creates permanent scars even if healing eventually occurs. And those scars are the permanent cost of choosing patterns over people, choosing fear over love, choosing protection over connection. The avoidant will carry you as the one who got away for the rest of their life. You'll be the person they compare everyone to. You'll be the relationship they recognize as the one they should have fought for. You'll be the loss that taught them what their patterns cost. And carrying you this way is part of the permanent cost. They'll never fully move on from you because you represent both what they lost and what they destroyed in themselves through losing you. You'll haunt them not because you're trying to, but because they made you significant through mistreating you and then losing you. The destruction of the avoidance life for mistreating you is severe and possibly permanent, and it serves as warning about what happens when fear drives life choices. The avoidant chose fear over love at every decision point, and fear-driven choices created fear-based life. Isolated, defended, increasingly empty. They're living the natural conclusion of their patterns, and the living is destroying them. Whether they'll use the destruction as catalyst for transformation or as justification for further hardening remains to be seen. But either way, the destruction is their teacher now. And the lesson is brutal but clear. You cannot build meaningful life on avoidance of the things that make life meaningful. You cannot mistreat people who deserve better without eventually paying comprehensive price. And you cannot run from vulnerability and intimacy forever without those things you're running from eventually running you straight into the destruction you were trying to avoid.